Chapter 10 of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 10. The Attack. We won out of the reeds at last, for which I fervently thanked God, since to have crossed that endless march unguided, with the loss of only one man, seemed little less than miraculous. We emerged from them late in the afternoon and being wearied out, stopped for a while to rest and eat of the flesh of a buck that I had been fortunate enough to shoot upon their fringe. Then we pushed forward up the slope, proposing to camp for the night on the crest of it a mile or so away, where I thought we should escape from the deadly mist in which we had been enveloped for so long, and obtain a clear view of the country ahead. Following the bank of a stream which here ran down into the marsh, we came at length to this crest just as the sun was sinking. Below us lay a deep valley, a fold, as it were, in the skin of the mountain, well but not densely bushed. The woods of this valley climbed up the mountain flank for some distance above it and then gave way to grassy slopes that ended in steep sides of rock, which were crowned by a black and frowning precipice of unknown height. There was, I remember, something very impressive about this towering natural wall, which seemed to shut off whatever lay beyond the gaze of man, as though it veiled an ancient mystery. Indeed, the aspect of it thrilled me, I knew not why. I observed, however, that at one point in the mighty cliff there seemed to be a narrow cleft down which, no doubt, lava had flowed in a remote age, and it occurred to me that up this cleft ran a roadway, probably a continuation of that by which we had threaded the swamp. The fact that through my glasses I could see herds of cattle grazing on the slopes of the mountain went to confirm this view, since cattle imply owners of herdsmen, and search as I would, I could find no native villages on the slopes. The inference seemed to be that those owners dwelt beyond or within the mountain. All of these things I saw and pointed out to Robertson in the light of the setting sun. Meanwhile Umslopogaas had been engaged in selecting the spot where we were to camp for the night. Some soldierly instinct, or perchance some prescience of danger, caused him to choose a place particularly suitable to defence. It was on a steep-sided mound that more or less resembled a gigantic ant heap. Upon one side this mound was protected by the stream, which because of a pool was here rather deep, while at the back of it stood a collection of those curious and piled up water-worn rocks that are often to be found in Africa. These rocks, lying one upon another like the stones of a Cyclopean wall, curved round the western side of the mound, so that practically it was only open for a narrow space, say 30 or 40 feet, upon that face of it which looked on to the mountain. "Umslopogaas expects battle," remarked Hans to me with a grin. "Otherwise, with all this nice plain round us, he would not have chosen to camp in a place which a few men could hold against many. Yes, Baas, he thinks that those cannibals are going to attack us." "Stranger things have happened," I answered indifferently, and having seen to the rifles, went to lie down, observing as I did so that the tired Zulus seemed already to be asleep. Only Umslopogaas did not sleep. On the contrary, he stood leaning on his axe, staring at the dim outlines of the opposing precipice. "A strange mountain, Macumazahn," he said. "Compared to it that of the witch beneath which my kraal lies is but a little baby. I wonder what we shall find within it. I've always loved mountains, Macumazahn, ever since a dead brother of mine and I lived with the wolves in the Witch's lap, for on them I have had the best of my fighting." "Perhaps it is not done with yet," I answered wearily. "I hope not, Macumazahn, since some is due for us, after all these days of mud and stench. Sleep a while now, Macumazahn, for that head of yours which you use so much must need rest. Fear not, I and the little yellow man who do not think as much as you do, will keep watch and wake you if there is need, as mayhap there will be before the dawn. Here none can come at us except in front, and the place is narrow." So I lay down and slept as soundly as ever I had done in my life, for a space of 4 or 5 hours I suppose. Then by some instinct perhaps I awoke suddenly, feeling much refreshed in that sweet mountain air, a new man indeed, and in the moonlight saw Umslopogaas striding towards me. "Arise, Macumazahn," he said. "I hear men stirring below us." At this moment Hans slipped past him, whispering, "The cannibals are coming, Baas, a good number of them. I think they mean to attack before dawn." Then he passed behind me to warn the Zulus. As he went by I said to him, "If so, Hans, now is the time for your Great Medicine to show what it can do." "The Great Medicine will look after you and me all right, Baas," he replied, pausing and speaking in Dutch which Umslopogaas did not understand. "But I expect there will be fewer of those Zulus to cook for before the sun grows hot. Their spirits will be turned into snakes and go back into the reeds from which they say they were torn out," he added over his shoulder. I should explain that Hans acted as cook to our party and it was a grievance with him that the Zulus ate so much of the meat which he was called upon to prepare. Indeed, there is never much sympathy between Hottentots and Zulus. "What is the little yellow man saying about us?" asked Umslopogaas suspiciously. "He is saying that if it comes to battle, you and your men will make a great fight," I replied diplomatically. "Yes, we will do that, Macumazahn, but I thought he said that we should be killed and that this pleased him." "Oh dear no," I answered hastily. "How could he be pleased if that happened, since then he would be left defenceless, if he were not killed too. Now, Umslopogaas, let us make a plan for this fight." So together with Robertson rapidly we discussed the things. As a result, with the help of the Zulus, we dragged together some loose stones and the tops of 3 small thorn trees which we had cut down, and with them made a low breastwork, sufficient to give us some protection if we lay down to shoot. It was the work of a few minutes, since we had prepared the material when we camped, in case an emergency should arise. Behind this breastwork we gathered and waited, Robertson and I being careful to get a little to the rear of the Zulus, who, it will be remembered, had the rifles which the Strathmuir bastards had left behind them when they bolted, in addition to their axes and throwing assegais. The question was how these cannibals would fight. I knew that they were armed with long spears and knives, but I did not know if they used those spears for thrusting or for throwing. In the former case it would be difficult to get at them with the axes because they must have the longer reach. Fortunately, as it turned out, they did both. At length all was ready and there came that long and trying wait, the most disagreeable part of a fight, in which one grows nervous and begins to reflect earnestly upon one's sins. Clearly the Amahagger, if they really intended business, did not mean to attack till just before dawn, after the common native fashion. thinking to rush us in the low and puzzling light. What perplexed me was that they should wish to attack us at all, after having let so many opportunities of doing so go by. Apparently these men were now in sight of their own home, where no doubt they had many friends, and by pushing on could reach its shelter before us, especially as they knew the roads and we did not. They had come out for a secret purpose that seemed to have to do with the abduction of a certain young white woman for reasons connected with their tribal statecraft or ritual, which is the kind of thing that happens not infrequently among obscure and ancient African tribes. Well, they had abducted their young woman and were in sight of safety and success in their objects, whatever these might be. For what possible reason then could they desire to risk a fight with the outraged friends and relatives of that young woman? It was true that they outnumbered us and therefore had a good chance of victory, but on the other hand, they must know that it would be very dearly won, and if it were not won, that we should retake their captive, so that all their trouble would have been for nothing. Further, they must be as exhausted and travel worn as we were ourselves, and in no condition to face a desperate battle. The problem was beyond me and I gave it up with the reflection that either this threatened attack was a mere feint to delay us, or that behind it was something mysterious, such as a determination to prevent us at all hazards from discovering the secrets of that mountain stronghold. When I put the riddle to Hans, who was lying next to me, he was ready with another solution.
"They are men eaters, Baas," he said, "and being hungry, wish to eat us before they get to their own land, where doubtless they are not allowed to eat each other."
"Do you think so?" I answered, "when we are so thin?" And I surveyed Hans' scraggy form in the moonlight.
"Oh yes, Baas, we should be quite good boiled, like old hens, Baas. Also it is the nature of cannibals to prefer thin man to fat beef. The devil that is in them gives them that taste, Baas, just as he makes me like gin, or you turn your head to look at a pretty woman, as those Zulus say you always did in their country. Especially at a certain witch who was named Mameena and whom you kissed before everybody."
Here I turned my head to look at Hans, proposing to smite him with words or physically, since to have this Mameena myth, of which I have detailed the origin in the book called Child of Storm, re-arise out of his hideous little mouth was too much. But before I could get out a syllable, he held up his finger and whispered,
"Hush! The dawn breaks and they come. I hear them."
I listened intently but could distinguish nothing. Only straining my eyes, presently I thought that about 100 yards down the slope beneath us in the dim light, I caught sight of ghost-like figures flitting from tree to tree, also that these figures were drawing nearer. "Look out," I said to Robertson on my right. "I believe they are coming." "Man," he answered sternly, "I hope so, for whom else have I wanted to meet all these days?" Now the figures vanished into a little fold of the ground. A minute or so later they reappeared upon the hither side, where such light as there was from the fading stars and the gathering dawn fell full upon them, for here were no trees. I looked and a thrill of horror went through me, for with one glance I recognised that these were not the men whom we had been following. To begin with, there were many more of them, quite 100 I should think. Also they had painted shields, wore feathers in their hair and generally, so far as I could judge, seemed to be fat and fresh. "We have been led into an ambush," I said first in Zulu to Umslopogaas, immediately in front, and then in English to Robertson. "If so, man, we must just do the best we can," answered the latter. But God help my poor daughter, for those other devils will have taken her away, leaving their brethren to make an end of us." "It is so, Macumazahn," broke in Umslopogaas. "Well, whatever the end of it, we shall have a better fight. Now do you give the word and we will obey." The savages, for so I call them, although I admit that cannibals or not, they looked more like high class Arabs than savages, came on in perfect silence, hoping, I suppose, to catch us asleep. When they were about 50 yards away, running in a treble line with spears advanced, I called out "Fire!" in Zulu and set the example by loosing off both barrels of my express rifle at men whom I had picked out as leaders, with results that must have been more satisfactory to me than to the two Amahagger whose troubles in this world came to an end. There followed a tremendous fusillade, the Zulus banging off their guns wildly, but even at that distance managing for the most part to shoot over the enemy's heads. Captain Robertson and Hans, however, did better, and the general result was that the Amahagger, who appeared to be unaccustomed to firearms, retreated in a hurry to a fold of the ground whence they had emerged. Before the last of them got there, I loaded again, so that two more stopped behind. Altogether we had put 9 or 10 of them out of action. Now I hoped that they would give the business up, but this was not so, for being brave fellows, after a pause of perhaps 5 minutes, once more they charged in a body, hoping to overwhelm us. Again we greeted them with bullets and knocked out several, whereon the rest threw a volley of their long spears at us. I was glad to see them do this, although one of the Zulus got his death from it, while 2 more were wounded. I myself had a very narrow escape, for a spear passed between my neck and shoulder. Each of them carried but one of these weapons, and I knew that if they used them up in throwing, only their big knives would remain to them with which to attack us. After this discharge of spears, which was kept up for some time, they rushed at us, and there followed a great fight. The Zulus, throwing down their guns, rose to their feet and holding their little fighting shields which had been carried in their mats in the left hand, wielded their axes with the right. Umslopogaas, who stood in the centre of them, however, had no shield and swung his great axe with both arms. This was the first time that I had seen him fight, and the spectacle was in a way magnificent. Again and again the axe crashed down, and every time it fell it left one dead beneath the stroke, till at length those Amahagger shrank back out of his reach. Meanwhile Robertson, Hans and I, standing on some stones at the back, kept up a continual fire upon them, shooting over the heads of the Zulus who were playing their part like men. Yes, they shrank back, leaving many dead behind them. Then a captain tried to gather them for another rush, and once more they moved forward. I killed that captain with a revolver shot, for my rifle had become too hot to hold, and at the sight of his fall, they broke and ran back into the little hollow where our bullets could not reach them. So far we had held our own, but at a price, for 3 of the Zulus were now dead and 3 more wounded, one of them severely, the other 2 but enough to cripple them. In fact now there were left of them but 3 untouched men and Umslopogaas, so that in all for fighting purposes we were but 7. What availed it that we had killed a great number of these Amahagger when we were but 7? How could 7 men withstand such another onslaught? There in the pale light of the dawn we looked at each other dismayed. "Now," said Umslopogaas, leaning on his red axe, "there remains but one thing to do. Make a good end, though I would that it were in a greater cause. At least we must either fight or fly," and he looked down at the wounded. "Think not of us, Father," murmured one of them, the man who had a mortal hurt. "If it is best, kill us and be gone, that you may live to bear the axe in years to come." Well spoken, said Umslopogaas, and again stood still a while, then added, the word is with you, Macumazahn, who are our captain. I set out the situation to Robertson and Hans as briefly as I could, showing that there was a chance of life if we ran, but so far as I could see, none if we stayed. "Go if you like, Quatermain," answered the captain, "but I shall stop and die here, for since my girl is gone, I think I'm better dead." I motioned to Hans to speak.
"Baas," he answered, "the Great Medicine is here with us upon the earth and your reverend father, the Predikant, is with us in the sky. So I think we had better stop here and do what we can, especially as I do not want to see those reeds any more at present."
"So do I said briefly, giving no reasons. So we made ready for the next attack, which we knew would be the last, strengthening our little wall and dragging the dead Amahagger up against it as an added protection. As we were thus engaged, the sun rose and in its first beams some miles away on the opposite slopes of the mountain, looking tiny against the black background of the precipice, we saw a party of men creeping forward. Lifting my glasses I studied it and perceived that in its midst was a litter. "There goes your daughter," I said and handed the glasses to Robertson. "Oh my God," he answered, "those villains have outwitted us after all." Another minute and the litter, or rather the chair with its escort, had vanished into the shadow of the great cliffs, probably up some pass which we could not see. Next moment our thoughts were otherwise engaged, since from various symptoms we gathered that the attack was about to be renewed. Spears, upon which shone the light of the rising sun, appeared above the edge of the ground fold that I have mentioned, which to the east increased to a deep, bush-clad ravine. Also there were voices as of leaders encouraging their men to a desperate effort. "They are coming," I said to Robertson. "Yes," he answered, "they are coming and we are going. It's a queer end to the thing we call life, isn't it, Quatermain? And hang it all, I wonder what's beyond. Not much for me, I expect, but whatever it is could scarcely be worse than what I've gone through here below in one way and another." "There's hope for all of us," I replied as cheerfully as I could, for the man's deep depression disturbed me. "Mayhap, Quatermain, for who knows the infinite mercy of whatever made us as we are. My old mother used to preach of it and I remember her words now. But in my case I expect it will stop at hope or sleep, and if it wasn't for Inez I'd not mind so much, for I tell you I've had enough of the world and life. Look, there's one of them. Take that, you black devil," and lifting his rifle he aimed and fired at an Amahagger who appeared upon the edge of the fold of ground. What is more, he hit him, for I saw the man double up and fall backwards. Then the game began afresh, for the cannibals, I suppose they were cannibals like their brethren, crept out of shelter, advancing on their stomachs or their hands and knees, so as to offer a smaller mark, and dragging between them a long and slender tree trunk, with which clearly they intended to batter down our wall. Of course I blazed away at them, pretty carefully too, for I was determined that what I believed to be the last exercise of the gift of shooting that has been given to me should prove a record. Therefore I selected my men and even where I would hit them, and as subsequent examination showed, I made no mistakes in the 7 or 8 shots that I fired. But all the while, like poor Captain Robertson, I was thinking of other things, namely where I was bound for presently, and if I should meet certain folks there, and what was the meaning of this show called life, which unless it leads somewhere, according to my judgment, has none at all. Until these questions were solved, however, my duty was to kill as many of those ruffians as I could, and this I did with finish and dispatch. Robertson and Hans were firing also, with more or less success, but there were too many to be stopped by our 3 rifles. Still they came on till at length their fierce faces were within a few yards of our little parapet and Umslopogaas had lifted his great axe to give them greeting. They paused a moment before making their final rush, and so did we to slip in fresh cartridges. "Die well, Hans," I said, "and if you get there first, wait for me on the other side."
Yes, Baas, I always meant to do that, though not yet. We are not going to die this time, Baas. Those who have the Great Medicine don't die. It is the others who die, like that fellow," and he pointed to an Amahagger who went reeling round and round with a bullet from his Winchester through the middle, for he had fired in the midst of his remarks. "Bless the Great Medicine," I said, as I lifted my rifle to my shoulder. At that moment all those Amahagger, there were about 60 of them left, became seized with a certain perturbation. They stood still, they stared towards the fold of ground out of which they had emerged, they called to each other words which I did not catch, and then they turned to run. Umslopogaas saw, and with a leader's instinct acted. Springing over the parapet, followed by his remaining Zulus of the axe, he leapt upon them with a roar. Down they went before Inkosikaas like corn before a sickle. The thing was marvellous to see. It was like the charge of a leopard. So swift was the rush and so lightning like were the strokes, or rather the pecks of that flashing axe. For now he was tapping at their heads or spines with a gouge-like point upon its back. Nor were these the only victims, for those brave followers of his also did their part. In a minute all who remained upon their feet of the Amahagger were in full flight, vanishing this way and that among the trees. Hans fired a parting shot after the last of them, then sat down upon a stone and finding his corn-cob pipe proceeded to fill it. "The Great Medicine, Baas," he began sententiously, "or perhaps your reverend father, the Predikant."
Here he paused and pointed doubtfully with the bowl of the pipe towards the fold in the ground, adding,
"Here it is, but I think it must be your reverend father, not the Great Medicine. Yes, the Predikant himself, returned from heaven, the place of fires."
Looking vaguely in the direction he indicated, for I could not conceive what he meant, and thought that the excitement must have made him mad, I perceived a venerable old man with a long white beard and clothed in a flowing garment also white, who reminded me of Father Christmas at a child's party, walking towards us and radiating benignancy. Also behind him I perceived a whole forest of spear points emerging from the gully. He seemed to take it for granted that we should not shoot him, for he came on quite unconcerned, carefully picking his way among the corpses. When he was near enough, he stopped and said in a kind of Arabic which I could understand, "I greet you strangers in the name of her I serve. I see that I am just in time, but this does not surprise me, since she said it would be so. You seem to have done very well with these dogs," and he prodded a dead Amahagger with his sandalled foot. "Yes, very well indeed. You must be great warriors." Then he paused and we stared at each other. End of chapter 10 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander. 11 of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 11. Through the Mountain Wall. "These do not seem to be friends of yours," I said, pointing to the fallen. "And yet," I added, nodding toward the spearmen who were now emerging from the gully, "they are very like your friends." "Puppies from the same litter are often alike, yet when they grow up sometimes they fight each other," replied Father Christmas blandly. "At least these come to save and not to kill you. Look, they kill the others," and he pointed to them, making an end of some of the wounded men. "But who are these?" And he glanced with evident astonishment first at the fearsome looking Umslopogaas and then at the grotesque Hans. "Nay, answer not, you must be weary and need rest. Afterwards we can talk." "Well, as a matter of fact we have not yet breakfasted," I replied. "Also I have business to attend to here," and I glanced at our wounded. The old fellow nodded and went to speak to the captain of his force, doubtless as to the pursuit of the enemy, for presently I saw a company spring forward on their tracks. Then, assisted by Hans and the remaining Zulus, of whom one was Goroko, I turned to attend to our own people. The task proved lighter than I expected, since the badly injured man was dead or dying, and the hurts of the two others were in their legs and comparatively slight, such as Goroko could doctor in his own native fashion. After this, taking Hans to guard my back, I went down to the stream and washed myself. Then I returned and ate, wondering the while that I could do so with appetite after the terrible dangers which we had passed. Still, we had passed them, and Robertson Umslopogaas with 3 of his men, I and Hans were quite unharmed, a fact for which I returned thanks in silence but sincerely enough to Providence. Hans also returned thanks in his own fashion after he had filled himself, not before, and lit his corn pipe. But Robertson made no remark. Indeed, when he had satisfied his natural cravings, he rose and walking a few paces forward, stood staring at the cleft in the mountain cliff into which we had seen the litter vanish that bore his daughter to some fate unknown. Even the great fight that we had fought and the victory we had won against overpowering odds did not appear to impress him. He only glared at the mountain, into the heart of which Inez had been raped away, and shook his fist. Since she was gone all else went for nothing, so much so that he did not offer to assist with the wounded Zulus or show curiosity about the strange old man by whom he had been rescued.
"The Great Medicine, Baas," said Hans in a bewildered way, "is even more powerful than I thought. Not only has it brought us safely through the fighting and without a scratch, for those Zulus there do not matter, and there will be less cooking for me to do now that they are gone. It has also brought down your reverend father the Predikant from the place of fires in heaven, somewhat changed from what I remember him, it is true, but still without doubt the same. When I make my report to him presently, if he can understand my talk, I shall—"
"Stop your infernal nonsense, you son of a donkey," I broke in, for at this moment old Father Christmas, smiling more benignly than before, reappeared from the kloof into which he had vanished and advanced towards us bowing with much politeness. Having seated himself upon the little wall that we had built up, he contemplated us, stroking his beautiful white beard, then said, addressing me, "Of a certainty you should be proud who with a few have defeated so many. Still, had I not been ordered to come at speed, I think that by now you would have been as those are." and he looked towards the dead Zulus who were laid out at a distance like men asleep, while their companions sought for a place to bury them. "Ordered by whom?" I asked. "There is only one who can order," he answered with mild astonishment. "She who commands, she who is everlasting." It occurred to me that this must be some Arabic idiom for the eternal feminine, but I only looked vague and said, "It would appear that there are some whom this exalted everlasting She cannot command, those who attacked us, also those who have fled away yonder," and I waved my hands towards the mountain. "No command is absolute. In every country there are rebels, even as I have heard in heaven above us. But, Wanderer, what is your name?" "Watcher by Night," I answered. "Ah, a good name for one who must have watched well by night and by day too, to reach this country, living where She who commands says that no man of your colour has set foot for many generations. Indeed, I think she told me once that 2000 years had gone by since she spoke to a white man in the city of Kôr." "Did she indeed?" I exclaimed, stifling a cough. "You do not believe me?" he went on smiling. "Well, She who commands can explain matters for herself better than I who was not alive 2000 years ago, so far as I remember. But what must I call him with the axe?" "Warrior is his name." "Again a good name, as to judge by the wounds on them. Certain of those rebels I think are now telling each other in hell. And this man, if indeed he be a man," he added, looking doubtfully at Hans. "Light in Darkness is his name." "I see. Doubtless because his colour is that of the winter sun in thick fog, or a bad egg broken into milk. And the other white man, who mutters and whose brow is like a storm?" "He is called Avenger. You will learn why later on," I answered impatiently, for I grew tired of this catechism, adding, "And what are you called, and, if you are pleased to tell it to us, upon what errand do you visit us in so fortunate an hour?" "I am Billali," he answered, "the servant and messenger of She who commands, and I was sent to save you and to bring you safely to her." "How can this be, Billali, seeing that none knew of our coming?" "Yet She who commands knew," he said with a benignant smile. "Indeed, I think that she learned of it some moons ago through a message that was sent to her, and so arranged all things that you should be guided safely to her secret home, since otherwise how would you have passed a great pathless swamp with the loss, I think she said, of but one man whom a snake bit?" Now I stared at the old fellow, for how could he know of the death of this man? But thought it useless to pursue the conversation further. "When you are rested and ready," he went on, "we will start. Meanwhile I leave you that I may prepare litters to carry those wounded men, and you also, Watcher by Night, if you wish." Then with a dignified bow, for everything about this old fellow was stately, he turned and vanished into the kloof. The next hour or so was occupied in the burial of the dead Zulus, a ceremony in which I took no part beyond standing up and raising my hat as they were borne away, for, as I have said somewhere, it is best to leave natives alone on these occasions. Indeed, I lay down, reflecting that strangely enough there seemed to be something in old Zikali's tale of a wonderful white queen who lived in a mountain fastness, since there was the mountain as he had drawn it on the ashes, and the servants of that queen who, apparently, had knowledge of our coming, appeared in the nick of time to rescue us from one of the tightest fixes in which I ever found myself. Moreover, the antique and courteous individual called Billali spoke of her as She who is everlasting. What the deuce could he mean by that, I wondered. Probably that she was very old and therefore disagreeable to look on, which I confessed to myself would be a disappointment. And how did she know that we were coming? I could not guess, and when I asked Robertson, he merely shrugged his shoulders and intimated that he took no interest in the matter. The truth is that nothing moved the man, whose whole soul was wrapped in one desire, namely to rescue or avenge the daughter against whom he knew he had so sorely sinned. In fact, this loose living but reformed seaman was becoming a monomaniac and, what is more, one of the religious type. He had a Bible with him that had been given to him by his mother when he was a boy, and in this he read constantly. Also he was always on his knees, and at night I could hear him groaning and praying aloud. Doubtless, now that the change of drink had fallen off him, the instincts and the blood of the dour old Covenanters from whom he was descended were asserting themselves. In a way this was a good thing, though for some time past I had feared lest it should end in his going mad, and certainly as a companion he was more cheerful in his unregenerate days. Abandoning speculation as useless and taking my chance of being murdered where I lay, for after all Billali's followers were singularly like the men with whom we had been fighting and for aught I knew might be animated by identical objects, I just went to sleep, as I can do at any time, to wake up an hour or so later feeling wonderfully refreshed. Hans, who when I closed my eyes was already asleep, slumbering at my feet curled up like a dog on a spot where the sun struck hotly, roused me by saying, "Awake, Baas, they are here." I sprang up, snatching at my rifle, for I thought that he meant that we were being attacked again, to see Billali advancing at the head of a train of 4 litters made of bamboo with grass mats for curtains and coverings, each of which was carried by stalwart Amahagger, as I supposed that they must be. 2 of these, the finest, Billali indicated were for Robertson and myself, and the 2 others for the wounded. Umslopogaas and the remaining Zulus evidently were expected to walk, as was Hans. "How did you make these so quickly?" I asked, surveying their elegant and indeed artistic workmanship. "We did not make them, Watcher by Night. We brought them with us folded up. She who commands looked in her glass and said that 4 would be needed, besides my own which is yonder, 2 for white lords and 2 for wounded black men, which you see is the number required." "Yes," I answered vaguely, marvelling what kind of a glass it was that gave the lady this information. Before I could inquire upon the point, Billali added, "You will be glad to learn that my men caught some of those rebels who dared to attack you, 8 or 10 of them who had been hurt by your missiles or axe cuts, and put them to death in the proper fashion. Yes, quite the proper fashion," and he smiled a little. "The rest had gone too far where it would have been dangerous to follow them among the rocks. Enter now, my lord Watcher by Night, for the road is steep, and we must travel fast if we would reach the place where she who commands is camped in the ancient holy city before the moon sinks behind the cliffs tonight." So having explained matters to Robert and Umslopogaas, who announced that nothing would induce him to be carried like an old woman or a corpse upon a shield, and seen that the hurt Zulus were comfortably accommodated, Robertson and I got into our litters, which proved to be delightfully easy and restful. Then, when our gear was collected by the hook-nosed bearers to whom we were obliged to trust, though we kept with us our rifles and a certain amount of ammunition, we started. First went a number of Billali's spearmen. Then came the litters with the wounded alongside of which Umslopogaas and his 3 uninjured Zulus talked or trotted. Then another litter containing Billali. Then my own, by which ran Hans and Robertson's, and lastly the rest of the Amahagger and the relief bearers.
"I see now, Baas,"
said Hans, thrusting his head between my curtains.
that yonder white beard cannot be your reverend father, the Predikant, after all?"
"Why not?" I asked, though the fact was fairly obvious.
"Because, Baas, if he were he would not have left Hans, of whom he always thought so well, to run in the sun like a dog, while he and the others travel in carriages like great white ladies."
"You had better save your breath instead of talking nonsense, Hans," I said, "since I believe that you have a long way to go." In fact it proved to be a very long way indeed, especially as after we began to breast the mountain, we must travel slowly. We started about 10 o'clock in the morning, for the fight, which after all did not take long, had, it will be remembered, begun shortly after dawn, and it was 3 in the afternoon before we reached the base of the towering cliff which I have mentioned. Here, at the foot of a remarkable, isolated column of rock, on which I was destined to see a strange sight in the after days, we halted and ate of the remaining food which we had brought with us, while the Amahagger consumed their own, that seemed to consist largely of curdled milk, such as the Zulus called maas, and lumps of a kind of bread. I noted that they were a very curious people, who fed in silence and on whose handsome solemn faces one never saw a smile. Somehow it gave me the creeps to look at them. Robertson was affected in the same way, for in one of the rare intervals of his abstraction he remarked that they were "no canny." Then he added, "Ask yon old wizard, who might be one of the Bible prophets come to life, what those man-eating devils have done with my daughter." I did so, and Billali answered, "Say that they have taken her away to make a queen of her, since having rebelled against their own queen they must have another who is white. Say too that she who commands will wage war on them and perhaps win her back, unless they kill her first." "Ah," Robertson repeated when I had translated, "unless they kill her first, or worse." Then he relapsed into his usual silence. Presently we started on again, heading straight for what looked like a sheer wall of black rock 1,000 feet or more in height, up a path so steep that Robertson and I got out and walked, or rather scrambled, in order to ease the bearers. Billali, I noticed, remained in his litter. The convenience of the bearers did not trouble him. He only ordered an extra gang to the poles. I could not imagine how we were to negotiate this precipice, nor could Umslopogaas, who looked at it and said, "If we are going to climb that, Macumazahn, I think that the only one who will live to get to the top will be that little yellow monkey of yours," and he pointed with his axe at Hans.
"If I do,"
replied that worthy, much nettled, for he hated to be called a yellow monkey by the Zulus,
"be sure that I will roll down stones upon any black butcher whom I see sprawling upon the cliff below."
Umslopogaas smiled grimly, for he had a sense of humour and could appreciate a repartee even when it hit him hard. Then we stopped talking, for the climb took all our breath. At length we came to the cliff face where, to all appearance, our journey must end. Suddenly, however, out of the blind black wall in front of us started the apparition of a tall man armed with a great spear and wearing a white robe, who challenged us hoarsely. Suddenly he stood before us as a ghost might do, though whence he came we could not see. Presently the mystery was explained. Here in the cliff face there was a cleft, though one invisible even from a few paces away, since its outer edge projected over the inner wall of rock. Moreover, this opening was not above 4 feet in width, a mere split in the huge mountain mass caused by some titanic convulsion in past ages, for it was a definite split since, once entered, far, far above could be traced a faint line of light coming from the sky, although the gloom of the passage was such that torches, which were stored at hand, must be used by those who threaded it. One man could have held the place against 100, until he was killed. Still it was guarded not only at the mouth where the warrior had appeared, but further along at every turn in the jagged chasm, and these were many. Into this grim place we went. The Zulus did not like it at all, for they are a light loving people, and I noted that even Umslopogaas seemed scared and hung back a little. Nor did Hans, who with his usual suspicion feared some trap, nor for the matter of that did I, though I thought it well to appear much interested. Only Robertson seemed quite indifferent and trudged along stolidly after a man carrying a torch. Old Billali put his head out of the litter and shouted back to me to fear nothing, since there were no pitfalls in the path, his voice echoing strangely between those narrow walls of measureless height. For half an hour or more we pursued this dreary winding path, round the corners of which the draught tore in gusts so fierce that more than once the litters with the wounded men and those who bore them were nearly blown over. It was safe enough, however, since on either side of us, smooth and without break, rose the sheer walls of rock over which lay the tiny ribbon of blue sky. At length the cleft widened somewhat and the light grew stronger, making the torches unnecessary. Then of a sudden we came to its end and found ourselves upon a little plateau in the mountain side. Behind us for 1,000 feet or so rose the sheer rock wall as it did upon the outer face, while in front and beneath, far beneath, was a beautiful plain, circular in shape and of great extent, which plain was everywhere surrounded, so far as I could see, by the same wall of rock. In short, notwithstanding its enormous size, without doubt it was neither more nor less than the crater of a vast extinct volcano. Lastly, not far from the centre of this plain was what appeared to be a city, since through my glasses I could see great walls, built of stone, and what I thought were houses, all of them of a character more substantial than any I had discovered in the wilds of Africa. I went to Billali's litter and asked him who lived in the city. "No one," he answered. "It has been dead for thousands of years, but she who commands is camped there at present with an army, and thither we go at once. Forward, bearers." So Robertson and I, having re-entered our litters, we started on downhill at a rapid pace, for the road, though steep, was safe and kept in good order. All the rest of that afternoon we travelled, and by sunset reached the edge of the plain, where we halted a while to rest and eat, till the light of the growing moon grew strong enough to enable us to proceed. Umslopogaas came up and spoke to me. "Here is a fortress indeed, Macumazahn," he said, "since no one can climb that fence of rock in which the holes seem to be few and small." "Yes," I answered, "but it is one out of which those who are in would find it difficult to get out. We are buffaloes in a pit, Umslopogaas." "That is so," he answered. "I have thought it already. But if any would meddle with us we still have our horns and can toss for a while." Then he went back to his men. The sunset in that great solemn place was a wonderful thing to see. First of all the measureless crater was filled with light like a bowl with fire. Then as the great orb sank behind the western cliff, half of the plain became quite dark, while shadows seemed to rush forward over the eastern part of its surface, till that too was swallowed up in gloom, and for a little while there remained only a glow, reflected upon the cliff face and from the sky above, while on the crest of the parapet of rock played strange and glorious fires. Presently these too vanished and the world was dark. Then the half moon broke from behind a bank of clouds, and by its silver, uncertain light we struggled forward across the flat plain, rather slowly now, for even the iron muscles of those bearers grew tired. I could not see much of it, but I gathered that we were passing through crops, very fine crops to judge by their height, as doubtless they would be upon this lava soil. Also once or twice we splashed through streams. At length, being tired and lulled by the swaying of the litter and by the sound of a weird, low chant that the bears had set up now that they neared home and were afraid of no attack, I sank into a doze. When I awoke again it was to find that the litter had halted and to hear the voice of Billali say, "Descend, white lords, and come with your companions, the black warrior and the yellow man who is named Light in Darkness. She who commands desires to see you at once before you eat and sleep, and must not be kept waiting. Fear not for the others, they will be cared for till you return." End of chapter 11 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander. Of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 12. The White Witch. I descended from the litter and told the others what the old fellow had said. Robertson did not want to come, and indeed refused to do so until I suggested to him that such conduct might prejudice a powerful person against us. Umslopogaas was indifferent, putting, as he remarked, no faith in a ruler who was a woman. Only Hans, although he was so tired, acquiesced with some eagerness, for the fact being that his brain was more alert and that he had all the curiosity of the monkey tribe which he so much resembled in appearance, and wanted to see this queen whom Zikali revered. In the end we started, conducted by Billali and by men who carried torches, whereof the light showed me that we were passing between houses, or at any rate walls that had been those of houses, and along what seemed to be a paved street. Walking under what I took to be a great arch or portico, we came into a court that was full of towering pillars but unroofed, for I could see the stars above. At its end we entered a building of which the doorway was hung with mats, to find that it was lighted with lamps and that all down its length on either side guards with long spears stood at intervals.
"Oh, Baas," said Hans hesitatingly, "this is the mouth of a trap,"
while Umslopogaas glared about him suspiciously, fingering the handle of his great axe. "Be silent," I answered. "All this mountain is a trap, therefore another does not matter, and we have our pistols." Walking forward between the double line of guards who stood immovable as statues, we came to some curtains hung at the end of a long narrow hall which, although I know little of such things, were, I noted, made of rich stuff embroidered in colours and with golden threads. Before these curtains Billali motioned us to halt. After a whispered colloquy with some beyond, carried on through the join of the curtains, he vanished between them, leaving us alone for 5 minutes or more. At length they opened and a tall and elegant woman with an Arab cast of countenance and clad in white robes appeared and beckoned us to enter. She did not speak or answer when I spoke to her, which was not wonderful as afterwards I discovered that she was a mute. We went in, I wondering very much what we were going to see. On the further side of the curtains was a room of no great size, illumined with lamps of which the light fell upon sculptured walls. It looked to me as though it might once have been the inmost court or a sanctuary of some temple, for at its head was a dais upon which once perhaps had stood the shrine or statue of a god. On this dais there was now a couch, and on the couch a goddess. There she sat, straight and still, clothed in shining white and veiled. but with her draperies so arranged that they emphasized rather than concealed the wonderful elegance of her tall form. From beneath the veil, which was such as a bride wears, appeared two plaits of glossy raven hair of great length, to the end of each of which was suspended a single large pearl. On either side of her stood a tall woman like her who had led us through the curtains, and on his knees in front, but to the right, knelt Billali. About this seated personage there was an air of singular majesty, such as might pervade a queen as fancy paints her, though she had a nobler figure than any queen I ever saw depicted. Mystery seemed to flow from her. It clothed her like the veil she wore, which of course heightened the effect. Beauty flowed from her also. Although it was shrouded, I knew that it was there. No veil or coverings could obscure it, at least to my imagination. Moreover, she breathed out power also. One felt it in the air as one feels a thunderstorm before it breaks, and it seemed to me that this power was not quite human, that it drew its strength from afar and dwelt a stranger to the earth. To tell the truth, although my curiosity, always strong, was enormously excited, and though now I felt glad that I had attempted this journey with all its perils, I was horribly afraid, so much afraid that I should have liked to turn and run away. From the beginning I knew myself to be in the presence of an unearthly being, clothed in a soft and perfect woman's flesh, something alien, too, and different from our human race. What a picture it all made. There she sat, quiet and stately as a perfect marble statue. Only her breast, rising and falling beneath the white robe, showed that she was alive and breathed as others do. Another thing showed it also, her eyes. At first I could not see them through the veil, but presently, either because I grew accustomed to the light or because they brightened as those of certain animals have power to do when they watch intently, it ceased to be a covering to them. Distinctly I saw them now, large and dark and splendid with a tinge of deep blue in the iris, alluring and yet awful in their majestic aloofness which seemed to look through and beyond, to embrace all without seeking and without effort. Those eyes were like windows through which light flows from within, a light of the spirit. I glanced round to see the effect of this vision upon my companions. It was most peculiar. Hans had sunk to his knees, his hands were joined in the attitude of prayer, and his ugly little face reminded me of that of a big fish out of water and dying from excess of air. Robertson, startled out of his abstraction, stared at the royal looking woman on the couch with his mouth open. "Man," he whispered, "I've got them back although I have touched nothing for weeks. Only this time they are lovely, for yon's no human lady. I feel it in my bones." Umslopogaas stood great and grim, his hands resting on the handle of his tall axe, and he stared also, the blood pulsing against the skin that covered the hole in his head. "Watcher by night," he said to me in his deep voice, but also speaking in a whisper. "This chieftainess is not one woman, but all women. Beneath those robes of hers I seem to see the beauty of one who has gone beyond, of the lily who is lost to me. Do you not feel it thus, Macumazahn?" Now that he mentioned it, certainly I did. Indeed, I had felt it all along, although amid the rush of sensations this one had scarcely disentangled itself in my mind. I looked at the draped shape and saw—well, never mind whom I saw. It was not one only, but several in sequence. Also a woman who at that time I did not know, although I came to know her afterwards, too well perhaps, or at any rate quite enough to puzzle me. The odd thing was that in this hallucination the personalities of these individuals seemed to overlap and merge, till at last I began to wonder whether they were not parts of the same entity or being, manifesting itself in sundry shapes, yet springing from one centre, as different coloured rays flow from the same crystal, while the beams from their source of light shift and change. But the fancy is too metaphysical for my poor powers to express as clearly as I would. Also no doubt it was but a hallucination that had its origin, perhaps in the mischievous brain of her who sat before us. At length she spoke and her voice sounded like silver bells heard over water in a great calm. It was low and sweet, oh so sweet, that at its first notes for a moment my senses seemed to swoon and my pulse to stop. It was to me that she addressed herself. "My servants here," and ever so slightly she turned her head towards the kneeling Billali, "tells me that you who are named Watcher in the Night understand the tongue in which I speak to you. Is it so?" "I understand Arabic of a kind well enough, having learnt it on the East Coast and from Arabs in past years, but not such Arabic as you use, oh," and I paused. "Call me Hiya," she broke in, "which is my title here, meaning, as you know, she or woman. Or if that does not please you, call me Ayesha. It would rejoice me after so long to hear the name I bore spoken by the lips of one of my colour and of gentle blood." I blushed at the compliment so artfully conveyed and repeated stupidly enough, "Not such Arabic as you use, O Ayesha." "I thought that you would like the sound of the word better than that of Hiya, though afterwards I will teach you to pronounce it as you should. Oh, have you any other name save Watcher by Night, which seems also to be a title?" "Yes," I answered, "Allan." "Oh, Allan, tell me of these," she went on quickly, indicating my companions with a sweep of her slender hand, "for they do not speak Arabic, I think. Or stay, I will tell you of them and you shall say if I do so rightly. This one," and she nodded towards Robertson, "is a man bemused. There comes from him a colour which I see if you cannot, and that colour betokens a desire for revenge, though I think that in this time he has desired other things also, as I remember men always did from the beginning to their ruin. Human nature does not change, Allan, and wine and women are ancient snares. Enough of him for this time. The little yellow one there is afraid of me, as are all of you. That is a woman's greatest power, although she is so weak and gentle. Men are still afraid of her just because they are so foolish that they cannot understand her. To them after 1,000,000 years she still remains the Unknown, and to us all the Unknown is also the Awful. Do you remember the proverb of the Romans that says it well and briefly?" I nodded, for it was one of the Latin tags that my father had taught me. "Good. Well, he is a little wild man, is he not, nearer to the apes from whose race our bodies come? But do you know that, Allan?" I nodded again and said, "There are disputes about the point, Ayesha." "Yes, they had begun in my day and we will discuss them later. Still I say, nearer to the ape than you or I, and therefore of interest, as the germ of things is always. Yet he has his qualities, I think, cunning and fidelity and love, which in its round is all in all. Do you understand, Allan, that love is all in all?" I answered warily that it depended upon what she meant by love, to which she replied that she would explain afterwards when we had leisure to talk, adding, "What this little yellow monkey understands by it at least has served you well, or so I believe. You shall tell me the tale of it some day. Now of the last, this black one. Here I think is a man indeed, a warrior of warriors, such as there used to be in the early world, if a savage. Well, believe me, Allan, savages are often the best. Moreover, all are still savage at heart, even you and I, for what is termed culture is but coat upon coat of paint laid on to hide our native colour, and often there is poison in the paint. That axe of his has drunk deep, I think, though always in fair fight, and I say that it shall drink deeper yet. Have I read these men aright, Allan?" "Not so ill," I answered. "I thought it," she said with a musical laugh, "although at this place I rust and grow dull like an unused sword. Now you would rest. Go, all of you. To-morrow you and I will talk alone. Fear nothing for your safety. You are watched by my slaves and I watch my slaves. Until to-morrow, then farewell. Go now, eat and sleep, as alas we all must do who linger on this ball of earth and cling to a life we should do so well to lose. Billali, lead them hence," and she waved her hand to signify that the audience was ended. At this sign Hans, who apparently was still much afraid, rose from his knees and literally bolted through the curtains. Robertson followed him. Umslopogaas stood a moment, drew himself up and lifting the great axe cried "Bayete," after which he too turned and went. "What does that word mean, Allan?" she asked. I explained that it was the salutation which the Zulu people only give to kings. "Did I not say that savages are often the best?" she exclaimed in a gratified voice. "The white man, your companion, gave me no salute, but the black one knows when he stands before a woman who is royal." "He too is of royal blood in his own land," I said. "If so, we are akin, Allan." Then I bowed deeply to her in my best manner and rising from her couch, for the first time she stood up, looking very tall and commanding, and bowed back. After this I went to find the others on the further side of the curtains, except Hans, who had run down the long narrow hall and through the mats at its end. We followed, marching with dignity behind Billali and between the double line of guards, who raised their spears as we passed them, and on the further side of the mats discovered Hans, still looking terrified.
"Baas," he
said to me as we threaded our way through the court of columns,
"in my life I have seen all kinds of dreadful things and faced them, but never have I been so much afraid as I am of that white witch, Baas. I think that she is the devil of whom your reverend father, the Predikant, used to talk so much, or perhaps his wife."
"If so, Hans," I answered, "the devil is not so black as he is painted. But I advise you to be careful of what you say, as she may have long ears."
"It doesn't matter at all what one says, Baas, because she reads thoughts before they pass the lips. I felt her doing it there in that room. And do you be careful, Baas, or she will eat up your spirit and make you fall in love with her, who I expect is very ugly indeed, since otherwise she would not wear a veil. Whoever saw a pretty woman tie up her head in a sack, Baas?"
"Perhaps she does this because she is so beautiful, Hans, that she fears the hearts of men who look upon her would melt."
"Oh no, Baas, all women want to melt men's hearts, the more the better. They seem to have other things in their minds, but really they think of nothing else until they are too old and ugly, and it takes them a long while to be sure of that."
So Hans went on talking his shrewd nonsense till, following so far as I could see the same roads as that by which we had come, we reached our quarters, where we found food prepared for us, broiled goat's flesh with corn cakes and milk, I think it was. Also beds for us two white men, covered with skin rugs and blankets woven of wool. These quarters, I should explain, consisted of rooms in a house built of stone of which the walls had once been painted. The roof of the house was gone now, for we could see the stars shining above us, but as the air was very soft in this sheltered plain, this was an advantage rather than otherwise. The largest room was reserved for Robertson and myself, while another at the back was given to Umslopogaas and his Zulus, and a third to the two wounded men. Billali showed us these arrangements by the light of lamps and apologized that they were not better, because, as he explained, the place was a ruin and there had been no time to build us a house. He added that we might sleep without fear as we were guarded, and none would dare to harm the guests of She who commands, on whom he was sure we, or at any rate I and the black warrior, had produced an excellent impression. Then he bowed himself out, saying that he would return in the morning, and left us to our own devices. Robertson and I sat down on stools that had been set for us, and ate, but he seemed so overcome by his experiences or by his sombre thoughts that I could not draw him into conversation. All he remarked was that we had fallen into queer company and that those who supped with Satan needed a long spoon. Having delivered himself of this sentiment, he threw himself upon the bed, prayed aloud for a while as had become his fashion, to be protected from warlocks and witches, amongst other things, and went to sleep. Before I turned in, I visited Umslopogaas' room to see that all was well with him and his people, and found him standing in the doorway staring at the star-spangled sky.
"Greeting, Macumazahn," he said, "you who are white and wise and I am black and a fighter, have seen many strange things beneath the sun, but never such a one as we have looked upon tonight. Who and what is that chieftainess, Macumazahn?"
"I do not know," I said, "but it is worth while to have lived to see her, even though she is veiled."
"Nor do I, Macumazahn. Nay, I do know, for my heart tells me that she is the greatest of all witches and that you will do well to guard your spirit lest she should steal it away. If she were not a witch, should I have seemed to behold the shape of Nada the Lily, who was the wife of my youth, beneath those white robes of hers, and though the tongue in which she spoke was strange to me, to hear the murmur of Nada's voice between her lips, of Nada who has gone further from me than those stars. It is good that you wear the great medicine of Zikali upon your breast, Macumazahn, for perhaps it will shield you from harm at those hands that are shaped of ivory."
"Zikali is another of the tribe," I answered laughing, "although less beautiful to see. Also I am not afraid of any of them, and from this one, if she be more than some white woman whom it pleases to veil herself, I shall hope to gather wisdom."
"Yes, Macumazahn, such wisdom as spirits and the dead have to give."
"Mayhap, Umslopogaas, but we came here to seek spirits and the dead, did we not?"
"Aye," answered Umslopogaas, "these and war, and I think that we shall find enough of all three. Only I hope that war will come the first, lest the spirits and the dead should bewitch me and take away my skill and courage."
Then we parted, and too tired even to wonder any more, I threw myself down on my bed and slept. I was awakened when the sun was already high, by the sound of Robertson, who was on his knees, praying aloud as usual, a habit of his which I confess got on my nerves. Prayer, in my opinion, is a private matter between man and his Creator, that is, except in church. Further, I did not in the least wish to hear all about Robertson's sins, which seemed to have been many and peculiar. It is bad enough to have to bear the burden of one's own transgressions without learning of those of other people. That is, unless one is a priest and must do so professionally. So I jumped up to escape and make arrangements for a wash, only to butt into old Billali, who was standing in the doorway contemplating Robertson with much interest and stroking his white beard. He greeted me with his courteous bow and said, "Tell your companion, O Watcher, that it is not necessary for him to go upon his knees to she who commands and must be obeyed," he added with emphasis, "when he is not in her presence, and that even then he would do well to keep silent, since so much talking in a strange tongue might trouble her." I burst out laughing and answered, "He does not go upon his knees and pray to she who commands, but to the Great One who is in the sky." "Indeed, Watcher. Well, here we only know a Great One who is upon the earth, though it is true that perhaps she visits the sky sometimes." "Is it so, Billali?" I answered incredulously. "And now I would ask you to take me to some place where I can bathe." "It is ready," he replied. "Come." So I called to Hans, who was hanging about with a rifle on his arm, to follow with the cloth and soap, of which fortunately we had a couple of pieces left, and we started along what had once been a paved roadway running between stone houses, whereof the time-eaten ruins still remained on either side. "Who and what is this queen of yours, Billali?" I asked as we went. "Surely she is not of the Amahagger blood." "Ask it of herself, O Watcher, for I cannot tell you. All I know is that I can trace my own family for 10 generations and that my 10th forefather told his son on his deathbed, for the saying has come down through his descendants, that when he was young, she who commands had ruled the land for more scores of years than he could count months of life." I stopped and stared at him, since the lie was so amazing that it seemed to deprive me of the power of motion. Noting my very obvious disbelief, he continued blandly, "If you doubt, ask. And now here is where you may bathe." Then he led me through an arched doorway and down a wrecked passage to what very obviously once had been a splendid bath house, such as some I have seen pictures of that were built by the Romans. Its size was that of a large room. It was constructed of a kind of marble with a sloping bottom that varied from 3 to 7 feet in depth, and water still ran in and out of it through large glazed pipes. Moreover, round it was a footway about 5 feet across, from which opened chambers unroofed now that the bathers used as dressing rooms, while between these chambers stood the remains of statues. One at the end indeed, where an alcove had protected it from sun and weather, was still quite perfect, except for the outstretched arms which were gone. The right hand I noticed lying at the bottom of the bath. It was that of a nude young woman in the attitude of diving, a very beautiful bit of work I thought, though of course I am no judge of sculpture. Even the smile mingled with trepidation upon the girl's face was most naturally portrayed. This statue showed me two things, that the bath was used by females and that the people who built it were highly civilized, also that they belonged to an advanced if somewhat Eastern race, since the girl's nose was, if anything, Semitic in character, and her lips, though prettily shaped, were full. For the rest, the basin was so clean that I presume it must have been made ready for me or other recent bathers, and at its bottom I discovered gratings and broken pipes of earthenware, which suggested that in the old days the water could be warmed by means of furnace. This relic of a long past civilization excited Hans even more than it did myself, since having never seen anything of the sort, he thought it so strange that, as he informed me, he imagined that it must have been built by witchcraft. In it I had a most delightful and much needed bath. Even Hans was persuaded to follow my example, a thing I had rarely known him to do before, and seated in its shallowed part, splashed some water over his yellow, wrinkled anatomy. Then we returned to our house, where I found an excellent breakfast had been provided, which was brought to us by tall, silent, handsome women, who surveyed us out of the corners of their eyes but said nothing. Shortly after I had finished my meal, Billali, who had disappeared, came back again and said that she who commands desired my presence as she would speak with me, also that I must come alone. So after attending to the wounded, who both seemed to be getting on well, I went, followed by Hans armed with his rifle, though I only carried my revolver. Robertson wished to accompany me as he did not seem to care about being left alone with the Zulus in that strange place. But this Billali would not allow. Indeed, when he persisted, two great men stepped forward and crossed their spears before him in a somewhat threatening fashion. Then at my entreaty, for I feared lest trouble should arise, he gave in and returned to the house. Following our path of the night before, we walked up a ruined street, which I could see was only one of scores in what had once been a very great city, until we came to the archway that I have mentioned, a large one, now overgrown with plants that from their yellow, sweet scented bloom I judged to be a species of wallflower, also with a kind of house leek or saxifrage. Here Hans was stopped by guards, Billali explaining to me that he must await my return, an order which he obeyed unwillingly enough. Then I went on down the narrow passage, lined as before by guards who stood silent as statues, and came to the curtains at the end. Before these, at a motion from Billali, who did not seem to dare to speak in this place, I stood still and waited. End of chapter 12 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander. Of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 13. Allan hears a strange tale. For some minutes I remained before those curtains until, had it not been for something electric in the air which got into my bones, a kind of force that perhaps in my fancy only seemed to pervade the place, I should certainly have grown bored. Indeed, I was about to ask my companion why he did not announce our arrival, instead of standing there like a stuck pig with his eyes shut as though in prayer or meditation, when the curtains parted and from between them appeared one of those tall waiting women whom we had seen on the previous night. She contemplated us gravely for a few moments, then moved her hand twice, once forward towards Billali as a signal to him to retire, which he did with great rapidity, and next in a beckoning fashion towards myself to invite me to follow her. I obeyed, passing between the thick curtains which she fastened in some way behind me, and found myself in the same roofed and sculptured room that I have already described. Only now there were no lamps, such light as penetrated it coming from an opening above that I could not see, and falling upon the dais at its head, also on her who sat upon the dais. Yes, there she was in her white robes and veil, the point and centre of a little lake of light, a wondrous and in a sense a spiritual vision, for in truth there was something about her which was not of the world, something that drew and yet frightened me. Still as a statue she sat, like one to whom time is of no account, and who has grown weary of motion, and on either side of her yet more still, like caryatides supporting a shrine, stood two of the stately women who were her attendants. For the rest a sweet and subtle odour pervaded the chamber, which took hold of my senses, as hashish might do, which I was sure proceeded from her,
or from her garments, for I could see no perfumes burning. She spoke no word, yet I knew she was inviting me to come nearer, and moved forward till I reached a curious carved chair that was placed just beneath the dais, and there halted, not liking to sit down without permission. For a long while she contemplated me, for as before I could feel her eyes searching me from head to foot and as it were looking through me, as though she would discover my very soul. Then at length she moved, waving those two ivory arms of hers outwards with a kind of swimming stroke, whereon the women to right and left of her turned and glided away, I know not whither. "Sit, Allan," she said, "and let us talk, for I think we have much to say to each other. Have you slept well and eaten, though I fear that the food is but rough? Also, was the bath made ready for you?" "Yes, Asha," I answered to all three questions, adding, for I knew not what to say, "it seems to be a very ancient bath." "When I last saw it," she replied, "it was well enough with statues standing round it, worked by a sculptor who had seen beauty in his dreams. But in 2000 years, or is it more? The tooth of time bites deep, and doubtless like all else in this dead place it is now a ruin." I coughed to cover up the exclamation of disbelief that rose to my lips, and remarked blandly that 2000 years was certainly a long time. "When you say one thing, Allan, and mean another, your Arabic is even more vile than usual and does not serve to cloak your thought." "It may be so, Ayesha, for I only know that tongue as I do many other of the dialects of Africa, by learning it from common men. My own speech is English, in which, if you are acquainted with it, I should prefer to talk." "I know not English, which doubtless is some language that has arisen since I left the world. Perhaps later you shall teach it to me. I tell you, you anger me, whom it is not well to anger, because you believe nothing that passes my lips and yet do not dare to say so." "How can I believe one, Asha, who if I understand aright speaks of having seen a certain bath 2000 years ago, whereas 100 years are the full days of man? Forgive me therefore if I cannot believe what I know to be untrue." Now I thought that she would be very angry and was sorry that I had spoken, but as it happened she was not. "You must have courage to give me the lie so boldly, and I like courage," she said, "who have been cringed to for so long. Indeed, I know that you are brave, who have heard how you bore yourself in the fight yesterday, and much else about you. I think that we shall be friends. But seek no more." "What else should I seek, Ayesha?" I asked innocently. "Now you are lying again," she said, "who know well that no man who is a man sees a woman who is beautiful and pleases him, without wondering whether, should he desire it, she could come to love him, that is, if she be young." "Which at least is not possible if she has lived 2000 years. Then naturally she would prefer to wear a veil," I said boldly, seeking to avoid the argument into which I saw she wished to drag me. "Ah," she answered, "the little yellow man who is named Light in Darkness put that thought into your heart, I think. Oh, do not trouble as to how I know it, who have many spies here, as he guessed well enough. So a woman who has lived 2000 years must be hideous and wrinkled, must she? The stamp of youth and loveliness must long have fled from her, of that you, the wise man, are sure. Very well, now you tempt me to do what I had determined I would not do, and you shall pluck the fruit of that tree of curiosity which grows so fast within you. Look, Allan, and say whether I am old and hideous, even though I have lived 2000 years upon the earth, and mayhap many more." Then she lifted her hands and did something to her veil, so that for a moment, only one moment, her face was revealed, after which the veil fell into its place. I looked, I saw, and if that chair had lacked a back, I believe that I should have fallen out of it to the ground. As for what I saw, well, it cannot be described, at any rate by me, except perhaps as a flash of glory. Every man has dreamt of perfect beauty, basing his ideas of it perhaps on that of some woman he has met who chanced to take his fancy, with a few accessories from splendid pictures of Greek statues thrown in, plus a garnishment of the imagination. At any rate I have, and here was that perfect beauty multiplied by 10, such beauty that at the sight of it the senses reeled, and yet I repeat that it is not to be described. I do not know what the nose or lips were like. In fact, all that I can remember with distinctness is the splendour of the eyes, of which I had caught some hint through her veil on the previous night. Oh, they were wondrous, those eyes, but I cannot tell their colour save that the groundwork of them was black. Moreover, they seemed to be more than eyes as we understand them. They were indeed windows of the soul, out of which looked thought and majesty and infinite wisdom, mixed with all the allurements and the mystery that we are accustomed to see or to imagine in woman. Here let me say something at once. If this marvellous creature expected that the revelation of her splendour was going to make me her slave, to cause me to fall in love with her as it is called, well, she must have been disappointed, for it had no such effect. It frightened and in a sense humbled me, that is all, for I felt myself to be in the presence of something that was not human, something alien to me as a man, which I could fear and even adore as humanity would adore that which is divine, but with which I had no desire to mix. Moreover, was it divine or was it something very different? I did not know. I only knew that it was not for me. As soon should I have thought of asking for a star to set within my lantern. I think that she felt this, felt that her stroke had missed, as the French say, that is, if she meant to strike at all at this moment. Of this I am not certain, for it was in a changed voice, one with a suspicion of chill in it, that she said with a little laugh, "Do you admit now, Allan, that a woman may be old and still remain fair and unwrinkled?" "I admit," I answered, although I was trembling so much that I could hardly speak with steadiness, "that a woman may be splendid and lovely beyond anything that the mind of man can conceive, whatever her age, of which I know nothing. I would add this, Ayesha, that I thank you very much for having revealed to me the glory that is hid beneath your veil." "Why?" she asked, and I thought that I detected curiosity in her question. "For this reason, Ayesha. Now there is no fear of my troubling you in such a fashion as you seemed to dread a little while ago. As soon would a man desire to court the moon sailing in her silver loveliness through heaven." "The moon? It is strange that you should compare me to the moon," she said musingly. "Do you know that the moon was a great goddess in old Egypt and that her name was Isis and, well, once I had to do with Isis. Perhaps you were there and knew it, since more lives than one are given to most of us. I must search and learn. For the rest, all have not thought as you do, Allan. Many, on the contrary, love and seek to win the divine." "So do I at a distance, Ayesha, but to come too near to it I do not aspire. If I did, perhaps I might be consumed." "You have wisdom," she replied, not without a note of admiration in her voice. "The moths are few that fear the flame, but those are the moths which live. Also I think that you have scorched your wings before and learned that fire hurts. Indeed, now I remember that I have heard of 3 such fires of love through which you have flown, Allan, though all of them are dead ashes now, or shine elsewhere. 2 burned in your youth when a certain lady died to save you, a great woman that, is it not so? And the 3rd, ah, she was fire indeed, though of a copper hue. What was her name? I cannot remember, but I think it had something to do with the wind. Yes, with the wind when it wails." I stared at her. Was this Mameena myth to be dug up again in a secret place in the heart of Africa? And how the deuce did she know anything about Mameena? Could she have been questioning Hans or Umslopogaas? No, it was not possible, for she had never seen them out of my presence. "Perhaps," she went on in a mocking voice, "perhaps once again you disbelieve, Allan, whose cynic mind is so hard to open to new truths. Well, shall I show you the faces of these 3? I can," and she waved her hand towards some object that stood on a tripod to the right of her in the shadow. It looked like a crystal basin. "But what would it serve when you who know them so well believed that I drew their pictures out of your own soul? Also, perhaps but one face would appear and that one strange to you." "Lady Ragnall perhaps, J.B." "Have you heard, Allan, that among the wise some hold that not all of us is visible at once here on earth within the same house of flesh, that the whole self in its home above separates itself into sundry parts, each of which walks the earth in different form, a segment of life's circle that can never be dissolved and must unite again at last?" I shook my head blankly, for I had never heard anything of the sort. "You have still much to learn, Allan, although doubtless there are some who think you wise," she went on in the same mocking voice. "Well, I hold that this doctrine is built upon a rock of truth. Also," she added after studying me for a minute, "that in your case these 3 women do not complete that circle. I think there is a 4th who as yet is strange to you in this life, though you have known her well enough in others." I groaned, imagining that she alluded to herself, which was foolish of me, for at once she read my mind and went on with a rather acid little laugh. "No, no, not the humble slave who sits before you, whom, as you have told me, it would please you to reject as unworthy, were she brought to you in offering, as in the old days was done at the courts of the great kings of the East. Oh, fool, fool, who hold yourself so strong and do not know that if I chose, before yon shadow had moved a finger's breadth, I could bring you to my feet, praying that you might be suffered to kiss my robe, yes, just the border of my robe." "Then I beg of you not to choose, Ayesha, since I think that when there is work to be done by both of us, we shall find more comfort side by side than if I were on the ground seeking to kiss a garment that doubtless then it would delight you to snatch away." At these words her whole attitude seemed to change. I could see her lovely shape brace itself up, as it were, beneath her robes, and felt in some way that her mind had also changed, that it had rid itself of mockery and woman's pique and like a shifting searchlight was directed upon some new objective. "Work to be done," she repeated after me in a new voice. "Yes, I thank you who bring it to my mind, since the hours pass and that work presses. Also I think there is a bargain to be made between us who are both of the blood that keeps bargains, even if they be not written on a roll and signed and sealed. Why do you come to me and what do you seek of me, Allan, Watcher in the night? Say it truthfully, for though I may laugh at lies and pass them by when they have to do with the eternal sword play which nature decrees between man and woman, until these break apart or, casting down the swords, seek arms in which they agree too well. When they have to do with policy and high purpose and ambition's ends, why then I avenge them upon the liar." Now I hesitated, as what I had to tell her seemed so foolish, indeed so insane, while she waited patiently as though to give me time to shape my thoughts. Speaking at last because I must, I said, "I come to ask you, Ayesha, to show me the dead, if the dead still live elsewhere." "And who told you, Allan, that I could show you the dead, if they are not truly dead? There is but one, I think, and if you are his messenger, show me his token. Without it we do not speak together of this business." "What token?" I asked innocently, though I guessed her meaning well enough. She searched me with her great eyes, for I felt and indeed saw them on me through the veil, then answered, "I think, nay, let me be sure," and half rising from the couch, she bent her head over the tripod that I have described and stared into what seemed to be a crystal bowl. "If I read aright," she said, straightening herself presently, "it is a hideous thing enough, the carving of an abortion of man, such as no woman would care to look on, lest her babe should bear its stamp. It is a charmed thing also that has virtues for him who wears it, especially for you, Allan, since something tells me that it is dyed with the blood of one who loved you. If you have it, let it be revealed, since without it I do not talk with you of these dead you seek." Now I drew Zikali's talisman from its hiding place and held it towards her. "Give it to me," she said. I was about to obey when something seemed to warn me not to do so. "Nay," I answered, "he who lent me this carving for a while charged me that except in emergency and to save others, I must wear it night and day till I returned it to his hand, saying that if I parted from it fortune would desert me. I believed none of this talk and tried to be rid of it, whereon death drew near to me from a snake, such a snake as I see you wear about you, which doubtless also has poison in its fangs, if of another sort, Asha." "Draw near," she said, "and let me look. Man, be not afraid." So I rose from my chair and knelt before her, hoping secretly that no one would see me in that ridiculous position, which the most unsuspicious might misinterpret. I admit, however, that it proved to have compensations, since even through the veil I saw her marvellous eyes better than I had done before, and something of the pure outline of her classic face; also the fragrance of her hair was wonderful. She took the talisman in her hand and examined it closely. "I have heard of this charm, and it is true that the thing has power," she said, "for I can feel it running through my veins; also that it is a shield of defence to him who wears it. Yes, and now I understand what perplexed me somewhat, namely how it came about when you vexed me into unveiling, but let that matter be. The wisdom was not your own, but another's, that is all. Yes, the wisdom of one whose years have borne him beyond the shafts that fly from woman's eyes, that ruinous shafts which bring men down to doom and nothingness. Tell me, Allan, is this the likeness of him who gave it to you?"
"Yes, Ayesha, the very picture, as I think carved by himself, though he said that it is ancient, and others tell that it has been known in the land for centuries." "So perchance has he," she answered dryly, "since some of our company live long. Now tell me this wizard's names. Nay, wait a while, for I would prove that indeed you are his messenger with whom I may talk about the dead and other things, Allan. You can read Arabic, can you not?" "A little," I answered. Then from a stool at her side she took paper, or rather papyrus, and a reed pen, and on her knee wrote something on the sheet which she gave to me folded up. "Now tell me the names," she said, "and then let us see if they tally with what I have written, for if so you are a true man, not a mere wanderer or a spy." "The principal names of this doctor are Zikali, the opener of roads, the thing that should never have been born," I answered. "Read the writing, Allan," she said. I unfolded the sheet and read Arabic words which meant weapons, cleaver of rocks, one at whom dogs bark and children wail. "The last two are near enough," she said, "but the first is wrong." "Nay, Asha, since in this man's tongue the word Zikali means weapons." Intelligence at which she clapped her hands as a merry girl might do. "The man," I went on, "is without doubt a great doctor, one who sees and knows things that others do not. But I do not understand why this token carved in his likeness should have power, as you say it has." "Because with it goes his spirit, Allan. Have you never heard of the Egyptians, a very wise people who, as I remember, declared that man has a Ka, or double, a second self that can either dwell in his statue or be sent afar?" I answered that I had heard this. "Well, the Ka of this Zikali goes with that hideous image of him, which seemed to dream so much of him last night. Tell me now, what does Zikali want of me whose power he knows very well?" "An oracle, the answer to a riddle, Ayesha." "Then set it out another time. So you desire to see the dead, and this old dwarf, who is a home of wisdom, desires an oracle from one who is greater than he? Good. And what are you, or both of you, prepared to pay for these boons?" "Know, Allan, that I am a merchant who sells my favours dear. Tell me then, will you pay?" "I think that it depends upon the price," I answered cautiously. "Set out the price, Ayesha." "Be not afraid, O cunning dealer," she mocked. "I do not ask your soul, or even that love of yours which you guard so jealously, since these things I could take without the asking. Nay, I ask only what a brave and honest man may give without shame, your help in war, and perhaps," she added with a softer tone, "your friendship, I think, Allan. I think, Allan, that I like you well, perhaps because you remind me of another whom I knew long ago." I bowed at the compliment, feeling proud and pleased at the prospect of a friendship with this wonderful and splendid creature, although I was aware that it had many dangers. Then I sat still and waited. She also waited, brooding. "Listen," she said after a while. "I will tell you a story, and when you have heard it you shall answer, even if you do not believe it, but not before. Does it please you to listen to something of the tale of my life which I am moved to tell you, that you may know with whom you have to deal?" Again I bowed, thinking to myself that I knew nothing that would please me more.
who was eaten up with a devouring curiosity about this woman. Now she rose from her couch and descending off the dais, began to walk up and down the chamber. I say to walk, but her movements were more like the gliding of an eagle through the air or the motion of a swan upon still water, so smooth were they and gracious. As she walked she spoke in a low and thrilling voice. "Listen," she said again, "and even if my story seems marvellous to you, interrupt and above all mock me not, lest I should grow angry, which might be ill for you. I am not as other women are, O Allan, who having conquered the secrets of nature—" Here I felt an intense desire to ask what secrets, but remembered and held my tongue. "To my sorrow have preserved my youth and beauty through many ages. Moreover, in the past perhaps in payment for my sins, I have lived other lives of which some memory remains with me. By my last birth I am an Arab lady of royal blood, a descendant of the kings of the East. There I dwelt in the wilderness and ruled a people, and at night I gathered wisdom from the stars and the spirits of the earth and air. At length I wearied of it all and my people too wearied of me and besought me to depart, for, Allan, I would have naught to do with men. Yet men went mad because of my beauty and slew each other out of jealousy. Moreover, other peoples made war upon my people, hoping to take me captive that I might be a wife to their kings. So I left them, and being furnished with great wealth in hoarded gold and jewels, together with a certain holy man, my master, I wandered through the world, studying the nations and their worships. At Jerusalem I tarried and learned of Jehovah, who is or was its God. At Paphos in the Isle of Chittim I dwelt a while till the folk of that city thought that I was Aphrodite returned to earth and sought to worship me. For this reason, and because I made a mock of Aphrodite, I who, as I have said, would have naught to do with men, she through her priests cursed me, saying that her yoke should lie more heavily upon my neck from age to age than on that of any woman who had breathed beneath the sun. It was a wondrous scene," she added reflectively, "that of the cursing, since for every word I gave back two. Moreover, I told the hoary villain of a high priest to make report to his goddess that long after she was dead in the world I would live on, for the spirit of prophecy was on Maine that hour. Yet the curse fell in its season, since in her day, doubt it or not, Aphrodite had strength, as indeed under other names she has and will have while the world endures, and for aught I know, beyond it. Do they worship her now in any land, Allan?" "No, only her statues because of their beauty, though love is always worshipped." "Yes, who can testify to that better than you yourself, Allan, if he who is called Zikali tells me the truth concerning you in the dreams he sends? As for the statues, I saw some of them as they left the master's hand in Greece, and when I told him that he might have found a better model, once I was that model. If this marvel still endures, it must be the most famous of them all, though perchance Aphrodite has shattered it in her jealous rage. You shall tell me of these statues afterwards. Mine had a mark on the left shoulder like to a mole, but the stone was imperfect, not my flesh, as I can prove if you should wish." Thinking it better not to enter on a discussion as to Ayesha's shoulder, I remained silent and she went on. "I dwelt in Egypt also, and there, to be rid of men who wearied me with their sighs and importunities, Also to acquire more wisdom, of which she was the mistress, I entered the service of the goddess Isis, Queen of Heaven, vowing to remain virgin for ever. Soon I became her high priestess, and in her most sacred shrines upon the Nile I communed with the goddess and shared her power, since from me her daughter she withheld none of her secrets. So it came about that though pharaohs held the sceptre, it was I who ruled Egypt and brought it and Sidon to their fall. It matters not how or why, as it was fated that I must do. Yes, kings would come to seek counsel from me where I sat throned, dressed in the garb of Isis and breathing out her power. Yet my task accomplished, of it all I grew weary, as men will surely do of the heavens that they preach, should they chance to find them. I wondered what this task might be, but only asked, why? Because in their picture heaven all things lie to their hands, and man being man cannot be happy without struggle, and woman being woman without victory over others. What is cheaply bought or given has no value, Allan. To be enjoyed it must first be won. But I bade you not to break my thought. I asked pardon and she went on. Then it was that the shadow of the curse of Aphrodite fell upon me, yes, and of the curse of Isis also, so that these twin maledictions have made me what I am, a lost soul, dwelling in the wilderness waiting the fulfilment of a fate whereof I know not the end. For though I have all wisdom, all knowledge of the past and much power together with the gift of life and beauty, the future is as dark to me as night without its moon and stars. Hearken, this chanced to me. Though it be to my shame, I tell it you, that all may be clear. At the temple of Isis on the Nile where I ruled, there was a certain priest, a Greek by birth, vowed like myself to the service of the goddess and therefore to wed none but her, the goddess herself that is, in the spirit. He was named Kallikrates, a man of courage and of beauty, such an one as those Greeks carved in the statues of their god Apollo. Never, I think, was a man more beautiful in face and form, though in soul he was not great, as often happens to men who have all else, and well nigh always happens to women, save myself and perhaps one or two others that history tells of, doubtless magnifying their fabled charms. The Pharaoh of that day, the last of the native blood, him whom the Persians drove to doom, had a daughter, the Princess of Egypt, Amenartas by name, a fair woman in her fashion, though somewhat swarthy. In her youth this Amenartas became enamoured of Kallikrates and he of her, when he was a captain of the Grecian mercenaries at Pharaoh's court. Indeed, she brought blood upon his hands because of her, wherefore he fled to Isis for forgiveness and for peace. Thither in after time she followed him and again urged her love. Learning of the thing and knowing it for sacrilege, I summoned this priest and warned him of his danger and of the doom which awaited him should he continue in that path. He grew affrighted. He flung himself upon the ground before me with groans and supplications, and kissing my feet vowed most falsely to me that his dealings with the royal Amenartas were but a veil and that it was I whom he worshipped. His unhallowed words filled me with horror and sternly I bade him begone and do penance for his crime, saying that I would pray the goddess on behalf of him. He went, leaving me alone lost in thought in the darkening shrine. Then sleep fell on me and in my sleep I dreamt a dream or saw a vision. For suddenly there stood before me a woman beauteous as myself, clad in nothing save a golden girdle and a veil of gossamer. "O Asha," she said in a honeyed voice, "priestess of Isis of the Egyptians, sworn to the barren worship of Isis and fed on the ashes of her unprofitable wisdom, know that I am Aphrodite of the Greeks, whom many times thou hast mocked and defied, and queen of the breathing world, as Isis is queen of the world that is dead. Now because thou didst despise me and pour contempt upon my name, I smite thee with my strength and lay a curse upon thee. It is that thou shalt love and desire this man who but now hath kissed thy feet, ever longing till the world's end to kiss his lips in payment, although thou art as far above him as the moon thou servest is above the Nile. Think not that thou shalt escape my doom, for know that however strong the spirit, here upon the earth the flesh is stronger still, and of all flesh I am the queen." Then she laughed softly and smiting me across the eyes with a lock of her scented hair, was gone. Allan, I awoke from my sleep and a great trouble fell upon me. For I, who had never loved before, now was rent with the rage of love, and for this man, who till that moment had been naught to me, but as some beauteous image of gold and ivory. I longed for him, my heart was racked with jealousy because of the Egyptian who favoured him. An eating flame possessed my breast. I grew mad. There in the shrine of Isis the divine, I cast myself upon my knees and cried to Aphrodite to return and give me him I sought, for whose sake I would renounce all else, even if I must pour my wisdom into a beauteous empty cup. Yes, thus I prayed and lay upon the ground and wept until, outworn, once more sleep fell upon me. Now in the darkness of the holy place once more there came a dream or vision, since before me in her glory stood the goddess, Isis, crowned with the crescent of the young moon and holding in her hand the jewelled sistrum that is her symbol, from which came music like the melody of distant bells. She gazed at me and in her great eyes were scorn and anger. "O Asha, daughter of wisdom," she said in a solemn voice, "whom I, Isis, had come to look upon rather as a child than a servant, since in none other of my priestesses was such greatness to be found, and whom in a day to be I had purposed to raise to the very steps of my heavenly throne, thou hast broken thine oath and, forsaking me, hast worshipped false Aphrodite of the Greeks, who is mine enemy. Yea, in the eternal war between the spirit and the flesh, thou hast chosen the part of flesh. Therefore I hate thee and add my doom to that which Aphrodite laid upon thee, which hadst thou prayed to me and not to her, I would have lifted from thy heart. Hearken, the Grecian whom thou hast chosen by Aphrodite's will, thou shalt love as the Parthian said. More, thy love shall bring his blood upon thy hands, nor mayst thou follow him to the grave. For I will show thee the source of life, and thou shalt drink of it to make thyself more fair even than thou art and thus outpace thy rival. And when thy lover is dead, in a desolate place thou shalt wait in grief and solitude till he is born again and find thee there. Yet shall this be but the beginning of thy sorrows, since through all time thou shalt pursue thy fate, till at length thou canst draw up this man to the height on which thine own soul stands by the ropes of love and loss and suffering. Moreover, through it all thou shalt despise thyself, which is man's and woman's hardest lot, thou who having the rare feast of spirit spread out before thee, hast chosen to fill thyself from the troughs of flesh. Then, Allan, in my dream I made a proud answer to the goddess, saying, "Hear me, mighty mistress of many forms who dost appear in all that lives. An evil fate has fallen upon me, but was it I who chose that fate? Can the leaf contend against the driving gale? Can the falling stone turn upwards to the sky? Or when nature draws it, can the tide cease to flow? A goddess whom I have offended, that goddess whose strength causes the whole world to be, has laid her curse upon me, and because I have bent before the storm, as bend I must, or break another goddess whom I serve, thou thyself, Mother Isis, hast added to the curse. Where then is justice, O Lady of the Moon?" "Not here, woman," she answered, "yet far away. Justice lives and shall be won at last, and mayhap because thou art so proud and high-stomached, it is laid upon thee to seek her blinded eyes through many an age. Yet at last I think thou shalt see thy signs against her weights and find the balance even. Therefore cease from questioning the high decrees of destiny which thou canst not understand, and be content to suffer, remembering that all joy grows from the root of pain. Moreover, know this for thy comfort, that the wisdom which thou hast shall grow and gather on thee, and with it thy beauty and thy power. Also that at the last thou shalt look upon my face again, in token whereof I leave to thee my symbol, the sistrum that I bear, and with it this command: follow that false priest of mine wherever he may go, and avenge me upon him. And if thou lose him there, wait while the generations pass till he return again. Such and no other is thy destiny." Allan, the vision faded, and when I awoke the lights of dawn played upon the image of the goddess in the sanctuary. They played moreover upon the holy jewelled thing that in my dream her hand had held, the sistrum of her worship, shaped like the loop of life, the magic symbol that she had vowed to me, wherewith goes her power, which henceforth was mine. I took it and followed after the priest Kallikrates, to whom thenceforward I was bound by passion's ties that are stronger than all the goddesses in this wide universe. Here I, Allan, could contain myself no longer and asked, "What for?" Then, fearing her wrath, wished that I had been silent. But she was not angry, perhaps because this tale of her interviews with goddesses, doubtless fabled, had made her humble, for she answered quietly, "By Aphrodite or by Isis, or both of them, I did not know. All I knew was that I must seek him, then and evermore, as seek I do to-day and shall perchance through aeons yet unborn. So I followed as I was taught and commanded, the sistrum being my guide, how it matters not, and giving me the means, and so at last I came to this ancient land, whereof the ruin in which you sit was once known as Kôr." End of chapter 13 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander.
Chapter 14 of She and Allan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Chapter 14. Allan misses opportunity. All the while that she was talking thus, the lady or the queen or the witch woman, Asha, had been walking up and down the place from the curtains to the foot of the dais, sweeping me with her scented robes as she passed to and fro. And as she walked she waved her arms as an orator might do to emphasize the more moving passages of her tale. Now at the end of it, or what I took to be the end, she stepped on to the dais and sank upon the couch as if exhausted, though I think her spirit was weary rather than her body. Here she sat a while brooding, her chin resting on her hand, then suddenly looked up and fixing her glance upon me, for I could see the flash of it through her thin veil, said, "What think you of this story, Allan? Do you believe it, and have you ever heard its like?" "Never," I answered with emphasis, "and of course I believe every word. Only there are one or two questions that with your leave I would wish to ask Ayesha." "By which you mean, Allan, that you believe nothing, being by nature without faith and doubtful of all that you cannot see and touch and handle. Well, perhaps you are wise, since what I have told you is not all the truth. For example, it comes back to me now that it was not in the temple of the Nile, or indeed upon the earth, that I saw the vision of Aphrodite and of Isis, but elsewhere. Also that it was here in Kôr that I was first consumed by passion for Kallikrates, whom hitherto I had scorned. In 2000 years one forgets much, Allan. Out with your questions and I will answer them, unless they be too long." "Ayesha," I said humbly, reflecting to myself that my questions would at any rate be shorter than her varying tale, "even I who am not learned have heard of these goddesses of whom you speak. Of the Grecian Aphrodite who rose from the sea upon the shores of Cyprus and dwelt at Paphos and elsewhere." "Yes, doubtless like most men you have heard of her and perchance also have been struck across the eyes with her hair, like your betters before you," she interrupted with sarcasm. "Also," I went on, avoiding argument, "I have heard of Isis of the Egyptians, Lady of the Moon, Mother of Mysteries, spouse of Osiris, whose child was Horus the Avenger." "Aye, and I think we'll hear more of her before you have done, Allan, for now something comes back to me concerning you and her and another. I am not the only one who has broken the oath of Isis and received her curse, Allan, as you may find out in the days to come. But what of these heavenly queens?" "Only this, Ayesha. I have been taught that they were but phantasms, fabled by men with many another false divinity, and could have sworn that this was true. And yet you talk of them as real and living, which perplexes me." "Being dull of understanding, doubtless it perplexes you, Allan. Yet if you had imagination you might understand that these goddesses are great principles of nature, Isis of throned wisdom and straight virtue, and Aphrodite of love, as it is known to men and women who, being human, have it laid upon them that they must hand on the torch of life in their little hour. Also you would know that such principles can seem to take shape and form, and at certain ages of the world appear to their servants visible in majesty, though perchance to-day others with changed names wield their sceptres and work their will. Now you are answered on this matter, so to the next." Privately I did not feel as though I were answered at all, and I was sure that I know nothing of the kind she indicated, but thinking it best to leave the subject, I went on. If I understood rightly, Ayesha, the events which you have been pleased first to describe to me and then to qualify or contradict, took place when the Pharaohs reigned. Now no Pharaoh has sat upon the throne of Egypt for near 2000 years, for the last was a Grecian woman whom the Romans conquered and drove to death. And yet, Ayesha, you speak as though you have lived all through that gulf of time, and in this there must be error, because it is impossible. Therefore I suppose you to mean that this story has come down to you in writing or perhaps in dreams. I believe that even in such far off times there were writers of romance, and we all know of what stuff dreams are made. At least this thought comes to me," I added hurriedly, fearing lest I had said too much, "and one so wise as you are, I repeat, knows well that a woman who says she has lived 2000 years must be mad or suffer from delusions, because, I repeat, it is impossible." At these quite innocent remarks she sprang to her feet in a rage that might truly be called royal in every sense. "Impossible! Romance, dreams, delusions, mad!" she cried in a ringing voice. "Oh, of a truth you weary me, and I have a mind to send you whither you will learn what is impossible and what is not. Indeed, I would do it, and now, only I need your services, and if I did there would be none left for me to talk with, since your companion is moonstruck and the others are but savages of whom I have seen enough. Hearken, fool, nothing is impossible. Why do you seek, you who talk of the impossible, to girdle the great world in the span of your 2 hands and to weigh the secrets of the universe in the balance of your petty mind and, of that which you cannot understand, to say that it is not? Life you admit because you see it all about you, but that it should endure for 2000 years, which after all is but a second's beat in the story of the earth, that to you is impossible, although in truth the buried seed or the sealed up toad can live as long. Doubtless also you have some faith which promise you this same boon to all eternity, after the little change called death. Nay, Allan, it is possible enough, like to many other things of which you do not dream today, that will be common to the eyes of those who follow after you. Mayhap you think it impossible that I should speak with and learn of you from yonder old black wizard who dwells in the country whence you came, and yet whenever I will I do so in the night, because he is in tune with me, and what I do shall be done by all men in the years unborn. Yes, they shall talk together across the wide spaces of the earth, and the lover shall hear her lover's voice although great seas roll between them. Nor perchance will it stop at this. Perchance in future time men shall hold converse with the denizens of the stars, and even with the dead who have passed into silence and the darkness. Do you hear and understand me?" "Yes, yes," I answered feebly. "You lie, as you are too prone to do. You hear but you do not understand, nor believe, and oh, you vex me sorely. Now I had it in my mind to tell you the secret of this long life of mine. Long, mark you, but not endless, for doubtless I must die and change and return again like others, and even to show you how it may be won. But you are not worthy in your faithlessness." "No, no, I am not worthy," I answered, who at that moment did not feel the least desire to live 2000 years, perhaps with this woman as a neighbour, rating me from generation to generation. Yet it is true that now when I am older and a certain event cannot be postponed much longer, I do often regret that I neglected to take this unique chance, if in truth there was one, of prolonging an existence which after all has its consolation, especially when one has made one's pile. Certainly it is a case, a flagrant case, of neglected opportunities, and my only consolation for having lost them is that this was due to the uprightness of my nature, which made it so hard for me to acquiesce in alternative statements that I had every cause to disbelieve and thus to give offence to a very powerful and petulant if attractive lady.
"So that is done with," she went on with a little stamp of indignation, "as soon you will be also, who, had you not crossed and doubted me, might have lived on for untold time and become one of the masters of the world as I am."
Here she paused, choked, I think, with her almost childish anger, and because I could not help it, I said, "Such place and power, if they be yours, Ayesha, do not seem to bring you much reward. If I were a master of the world, I do not think that I should choose to dwell unchangingly among the savages who eat men and in a pile of ruins. But perhaps the curses of Aphrodite and of Isis are stronger masters still," and I paused inquiringly. This bold argument, for now I see that it was bold, seemed to astonish and even bewilder my wonderful companion.
"You have more wisdom than I thought," she said reflectively, "who have come to understand that no one is really lord of anything, since above there is always a more powerful lord who withers all his pomp and pride to nothingness, even as the great kings learned in olden days, and I who am higher than they are, am learning now. Hearken. Troubles beset me wherein I would have your help and that of your companions, for which I will pay each of you the fee that he desires. The brooding white man who is with you shall free his daughter, and unharmed, though that he will be unharmed I do not promise, the black savage captain shall fight his fill and gain the glory that he seeks, also something that he seeks still more. The little yellow man asks nothing, save to be with his master like a dog, and to satisfy at once his stomach and his apish curiosity. You, Allan, shall see those dead over whom you brood at night, though the other guerdon that you might have won is now passed from your reach because you mock me in your heart."
"What must be done to gain these things?" I asked. "How can we humble creatures help one who is all powerful and who has gathered in her breast the infinite knowledge of 2000 years?"
"You must make war under my banner and rid me of my foes. As for the reason, listen to the end of my tale and you shall learn."
I reflected that it was a marvellous thing that this queen who claimed supernatural powers should need our help in a war, but thinking it wiser to keep my meditations to myself, said nothing. As a matter of fact, I might just as well have spoken, since, as usual, she read my thoughts.
"You are thinking that it is strange, Allan, that I, the mighty and undying, should seek your aid in some petty tribal battle, and so it would be, were my foes but common savages. But they are more. They are men protected by the ancient god of this immemorial city of Kôr, a great god in his day, whose spirit still haunts these ruins and whose strength still protects the worshippers who cling to him and practice his unholy rites of human sacrifice."
"Who was this god named?" I asked.
"Rezu was his name, and from him came the Egyptian Re or Ra, since in the beginning Kor was the mother of Egypt, and the conquering people of Kor took their god with them when they burst into the valley of the Nile and subdued its people long before the first Pharaoh, Menes, wore Egypt's crown." "Ra was the sun, was he not?" I asked. "Aye, and Rezu also was a sun god, whom from his throne in the fires of the Lord of Day gave life to men, or slew them if he willed, with his thunderbolts of drought and pestilence and storm. He was no gentle king of heaven, but one who demanded blood sacrifice from his worshippers, yes, even that of maids and children. So it came about that the people of Kor, who saw their virgins slain and eaten by the priests of Rezu, and their infants burned to ashes in the fires that his rays lit, turned themselves to the worship of the gentle moon, the goddess whom they named Lulala, while some of them chose Truth for their queen, since Truth, they said, was greater and more to be desired than the fierce Sun King or even the sweet Moon Lady, Truth, who sat above them both throned in the fairest stars of heaven. Then the demon Rezu grew wroth and sent a pestilence upon Kor and its subject lands and slew their people, save those who clung to him in the great apostasy, and with them some others who served Lulala and Truth the divine, that escaped I know not how." "Did you see this great pestilence?" I asked, much interested. "Nay, it befell generations before I came to Kôr. One Junis, a priest, wrote a record of it in the caves yonder where I have my home and where is the burying place of the countless thousands that it slew. In my day, Kôr, of which, should you desire to hear it, I will tell you the history, was a ruin as it is now, though scattered in the lands amidst the tumbled stones which once built up her subject cities, a people named the Amahagger dwelt in households or tribes and there sacrificed men by fire and devoured them, following the rites of the demon Rezu, for these were the descendants of those who escaped the pestilence. Also there were certain others, children of the worshippers of Lulala, whose kingdom is the moon, and of Truth the queen, who clung to the gentle worship of their forefathers and were ever at war with the followers of Rezu." "What brought you to Kôr, Ayesha?" I asked irrelevantly. "Have I not said that I was led hither by the command and by the symbol of great Isis whom I serve? Also," she added after a pause, "that I might find a certain pair, one of whom had broken his oath to her, tempted thereto by the other." "And did you find them, Ayesha?" I asked. "Aye, I found them, or rather they found me, and in my presence the goddess executed her decree upon her false priest and drove his temptress back to the world." "That must have been dreadful for you, Ayesha, since I understood that you also liked this priest." She sprang from her couch and in a low, hissing voice which resembled the sound made by an angry snake and turned my blood cold to hear, exclaimed, "Man, do you dare to mock me? Nay, you are but a blundering, curious fool, and it is well for you that this is so, since otherwise, like Kallikrates, never should you leave Kôr living. Cease from seeking that which you may not learn. Suffice it for you to know that the doom of Isis fell upon the lost Kallikrates, her priest forsworn, and that on me also fell her doom, who must dwell here, dead yet living, till he return again and the play begins afresh. Stranger," she went on in a softer voice, "perchance your faith, whatever it be, parades a hell to terrify its worshippers and give strength to the arms of its prophesying priests, who swear they hold the keys of doom or of the eternal joys." I see you sign assent." I had nodded at her extremely accurate guess. "And therefore can understand that in such a hell as this, here upon the earth I have dwelt for some 2000 years, expiating the crime of powers above me, whereof I am but the hand and instrument, since those powers which decreed that I should love, decree also that I must avenge that love." She sank down upon the couch as though exhausted by emotion, of which I could only guess the reason, hiding her face in her hands. Presently she let them fall again and continued, "Of these woes ask me no more. They sleep till the hour of their resurrection, which I think draws nigh. Indeed, I thought that you perchance, but let that be. 'Twas nearer the mark, nearer, Allan, than you know, not in it. Therefore leave them to their sleep as I would, if I might. Ah, if I might, whose companions they are throughout the weary ages. Alas, that through the secret which was revealed to me I remain undying on the earth, who in death might perhaps have found a rest, and being human although half divine, must still busy myself with the affairs of earth. Look you, Wanderer, after that which was fated had happened and I remained in my agony of solitude and sorrow, after, too, I had drunk of the cup of enduring life like the Prometheus of old fable, found myself bound to this changeless rock, whereon day by day the vultures of remorse tear out my living heart, which in the watches of the night is ever doomed to grow again within my woman's breast. I was plunged into petty troubles of the flesh, aye, and welcomed them because their irk at times gave me forgetfulness. When the savage dwellers in this land came to know that a mighty one had arisen among them who was the servant of the Lady of the Moon, those of them who still worshipped their goddess Lulala gathered themselves about me, while those of them who worshipped Rezu sought to overthrow me. 'Here,' they said, 'is the goddess Lulala come to earth. In the name of Rezu let us slay her and make an end, for these fools thought that I could be killed, Allan. I conquered them, but their captain, who also is named Rezu, and whom they held and hold to be an emanation of the god himself walking the earth, I could not conquer.' 'Why not?' I asked. 'For this reason, Allan. In some past age his god showed him the same secret that was shown to me. He too had drunk of the cup of life and lives on unharmed by time, so that being in strength my equal, no spear of mine can reach his heart clad in the armour of his evil god.' 'Then what spear can?' I inquired helplessly, who was bewildered. 'None at all, Allan, yet an axe may, as you shall hear, or so I think. For many generations there has been peace of a sort between the worshippers of Lulala who dwells with me in the plain of Kôr, or rather of myself, since of these people I am Lulala, and the worshippers of Rezu who dwell in the strongholds beyond the mountain crest. But of late years their chief Rezu, having devastated the lands about, has grown restless and threatened to attack on Kôr, which is not strong enough to stand against him. Moreover, he has sought for a white queen to rule under him, purposing to set her up to mock my majesty.' 'Is that why those cannibals carried away the daughter of my companion, the sea captain who is named Avenger?' I asked. 'It is, Allan, since presently he will give it out that I am dead or fled, if he has not done so already, and that this new queen has arisen in my place. Thereby he hopes to draw away many who cling to me, ere he advances upon Kôr, carrying with him this girl veiled as I am, so that none may know the difference between us, since not a man of them has ever looked upon my face, Allan. Therefore this Rezu must die, if die he can. Otherwise, although it is impossible that he should harm me, he may slay or draw away my people and leave me with none to rule in this place where by the decree of fate I must dwell on until he whom I seek returns. You are thinking in your heart that such savages would be little lost, and this is so. But still they serve as slaves to me in my loneliness. Moreover, I have sworn to protect them from the demon Rezu, and they have trusted in me, and therefore my honour is at stake. For never shall it be said that those who trusted in She who commands were overthrown because they put faith in one who was powerless."
"What do you mean about an axe, Ayesha?" I asked.
"Why can an axe alone kill Rezu? The thing is a mystery, O Allan, of which I may not tell you all, since to do so I must reveal secrets which I have determined you shall not learn. Suffice it to you to know that when this Rezu drank of the cup of life, he took with him his axe. Now this axe was an ancient weapon, rumoured to have been fashioned by the gods, and, as it is chanced, that axe drew to itself more and stronger life than did Rezu. How, it does not matter, if indeed the tale be more than a fable. At least this I know is true, for he who guarded the gate of life, a certain Noot, a master of mysteries and mine also in my day of youth, who being a philosopher and very wise, chose never to pass that portal which was open to him, said it to me himself ere he went the way of flesh. He told this Rezu also that now he had naught to fear save his own axe, and therefore he counselled him to guard it well, since if it was lifted against him in another's hands it would bring him down to death, which nothing else could do, like to the heel of Achilles, whereof the great Homer sings. Have you read Homer, Allan?"
"In a translation," I answered.
"Good. Then you will remember the story. Like to the heel of Achilles, I say, that axe would be the only gate by which death could enter his invulnerable flesh, or rather it alone could make the gate."
"How did Noot know that?" I asked.
"I cannot say," she answered with irritation. "Perchance he did not know it, perchance it is all an idle tale. But at least it is true that Rezu believed and believes it, and what a man believes is true for him and will certainly befall. If it were otherwise, what is the use of faith, which in 1,000 forms supports our race and holds it from the horrors of the pit? Only those who believe nothing inherit what they believe, nothing, Allan."
"It may be so," I replied prosaically, "but what happened about the axe?"
"In the end it was lost, or as some say, stolen by a woman whom Rezu had deserted, and therefore he walks the world in fear from day to day. Nay, ask no more empty questions."
I had opened my mouth to speak.
"But hear the end of the tale. In my trouble concerning Rezu I remembered this wild legend of the axe, and since when lost in a forest every path that may lead to safety should be explored, I sent my wisdom forth to make inquiry concerning it, as I who am great have the power to do, of certain who are in tune with me throughout this wide land of Africa. Amongst others I inquired of that old wizard whom you named Zikali, Opener of Roads, and he gave me an answer that there lived in his land a certain warrior who ruled a tribe called the People of the Axe by right of the axe, of which axe none, not even he, knew the beginning or the legend. On the chance, though it was a small one, I bade the wizard send that warrior here with his axe. Last night he stood before me and I looked upon him and the axe, which at least is ancient and has a story. Whether it be the same that Rezu bore, I do not know, who never saw it. Yet perchance he who bears it now is prepared to hold it aloft in battle even against Rezu, though he be terrible to see, and then we shall learn."
"Oh yes," I answered, "he is quite prepared for that is his nature. Also among this man's people the holder of the axe is thought to be unconquerable."
"Yet some must have been conquered who held it," she replied musingly. "Well, you shall tell me that tale later. Now we have talked long and you are weary and astonished. Go, eat and rest yourself. Tonight when the moon rises I will come to where you are, not before, for I have much that must be done, and show you those with whom you must fight against Rezu and make a plan of battle."
"But I do not want to fight," I answered, "who have fought enough and came here to seek wisdom, not bloodshed."
"First the sacrifice, then the reward," she answered. "That is, if any are left to be rewarded. Farewell."
End of chapter 14 of She and Allan by H Rider Haggard. Read by Lars Rolander.